Hey guys, I just got off work about 10 minutes ago, but I wanted to come on here and talk about something that, is actually more of a question. Talk about or ask something that, is really intriguing. And I know it doesn't, suit the fancy of a lot of folks. It doesn't suit the fancy of a lot of folks. And what that is basically, when it comes to NFSW adult, very adult fan fiction based on the Sonic franchise, whether it's Satam, just the games, X, IDW, Archie comics, or an amalgamation of all, including Boom, and potentially what we're getting with Prime, but let's say an amalgamation of them all, or a merger of them all. Depending on what it's based on. We always seem to have a moment in there where I guess they're basically described as MILFs. M-I-L-Fs, MILFs. And it seems that anytime we have a MILF involved, it's always with somebody, of the established cast, or one of the established cast of the overall franchise combined. But, you wonder to yourself, well, who are the most commonly used? Well, the most commonly used MILF, if you will, in any of these situations is Vanilla Rabbit, Cream's mother. She's always the one used. It doesn't matter if it's an LGBTQ lesbian thing. It doesn't matter if it's a straight up thing. It doesn't matter if it's a bisexual thing. It doesn't matter if it's a trio, a les trois, as they call it, whatever it is called, the Ming trios, whatever it's called. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a two-way relationship, three-way relationship. It doesn't matter. Like I said, it doesn't matter. She is always the one that is looked at basically as the go-to MILF in these situations. However, she's not alone. Now, there are countless MILFs, in the Sonic franchise that get called upon. Rosemary Prower, Tails' mom, from the Archie books. Bernadette Hedgehog, from the Archie books, who is Sonic's mom. I guess you could say Linda from the Echidna, from the Dark Legion of Echidnas. The list could go on. But there's one that surprisingly gets utilized more so than any of them. Someone that gets utilized just as much as Vanilla. And she too is from the Archie books. And I think you see the title down here below and it gives it away. She is Alicia Acorn. Queen Alicia Acorn. Sally's mom. A character that we did not get properly introduced to. We did not properly get introduced to until near the 100s. Yes, we saw her basically in cryogenic stasis, showing signs that she was coming back, showing signs that she was going to be revived again. And finally, in that one issue, she was, when she grasped King Acorn's hand, and at the time, he was revealed to be okay, but potentially paralyzed. That's when his wife came around. Now, with that said, Alicia made a lot of appearances. And I think the reason she was always called upon, or is always called upon currently, next to Vanilla, as the most requested MILF, if you will, from the Sonic overall franchise, to get intimate with certain characters, no matter who they are, is because of the fact that she strikes a very, very legit resemblance from head to toe to Sally. Now, of course, you might say, well, that's her mom. And that is true. It is her mom. But here's the thing. Some people will point out that her mom, of course, is a little taller. And some would even point out that, depending on who the artist is, that they add a few details here and there to the character. And be honest, if you look back at some of the issues she's in, they do exactly that. They do exactly that. But yeah, she, along with Vanilla, are the two most requested female characters of the MILF kind, if you will, to get called upon, into these situations. I mean, prime examples from what I've been told about, and heck, I'll be honest with you, I've even shared with you about here on YouTube and other places. Prime examples are, one prime example, I can't show it to you here, is PAL Comics. PAL Comics, which is PALCOMIX, has a Mobius Unleashed section dedicated to mostly adult XXX NFSW Sonic Web comics and stories, basically stories that are turned into web comics. And one of them is called A Helping Hand. And the premise of that story is that Alicia, is kind of in the mood, but Max is not. He's basically asleep. He is asleep, but she's in the mood. So she wanders the castle, and she bumps into Sally, who just is getting out of the shower. And they talk a little bit, bond a little bit, until Sally asks her mom to help dry her off. Basically, help dry her off in areas she can reach. It's then here where they sit down on the bed, and Alicia asks Sally a very personal question about how many times Sonic's you-know-what has been in Sally's you-know-what. And Sally basically said, I don't know, a couple of times and all that. Why? And Alicia tries to play it off like, oh, I'm just curious, just wondering. But then Sally gets this sly look on her face because she starts realizing, oh, I see what's going on, Mom. She doesn't say it out loud, but she kind of lets her actions speak louder than her words were. Her words would, I should say. She lets her actions speak a lot louder than her words because she sees what's going on. She sees that her mom's in the mood. So she, gives her what she wants. She gives her a very pleasurable time. She does the very usual LGBTQ lesbian acts, if you will. Encourages her mom, who accepts the encouragement to return the favor. They just go all out, and yes, they do kiss each other, French kiss, tongue wrestling kind of deal, if you will. And yeah, that's just how most of the comic goes until the end, where Max does wake up and sees what's going on, and then, well, you can kind of assume what happens from there. Anyway, but I'll tell you honestly though, when the people described me and even shared the comic with me, of how it began, how it went and how it ended, to be honest with you, if I was the writer and I was the artist, I would have not added Max's inclusion at the end. I would have left it out and put and I would have had them kissing still, or I would have had them kiss again, laying on the bed, and then that's it. And maybe with a caption saying, is this the start of a new romantic relationship or something? I would have not added Max into the inclusion of the ending, if I was the writer or the artist. But yeah, that's one example. That's one prime example. Another example, believe it or not, is, like I said, a story I shared with you and I talked to you about here on YouTube called Queen's Delight. This was a story by Blue Quill 68, I think. I think that's their name, on fanfiction.net. And basically it involved Alicia having a very intimate moment with Alina, Queen Alina from Sonic Underground. And the way the story is told is Alina is indicated to be from an alternate world, very similar to the Prime world, and that basically Sonic is willing to accept her as his mother because that's who she is in the other world, because I guess he comes face to face with his other self. Whatever. Anyway, to get to the point, Alina obviously is taking a shine to Alicia when they all first meet. And what she does later on is she kind of gives Alicia the time of her life. She gives her a very memorable night. You could check this out in the video if you want to. I put the script there, the story there, so you guys can read it. But she gives her a very memorable night, intimate night, to the point that basically it's indicated that these two are now girlfriends. They're now lovers. They're now in a relationship together, despite the fact that Alicia is still married to Max. But I think it's hinted at that maybe in this story's universe, that relationship, that marriage may come soon to an end, because Max is still described as he was before the reboot in 252 as being very cranky, old school, very not very, just basically a jerk. Basically a jerk, if you want to look at it that way. But yeah, that's another example. Another one, believe it or not, another one that was done is called, trying to think, Sweet Royal Love. Now originally it was called something else. It was based on something else, and I have both versions. The other one is a little bit more, I guess you could say, hardcore, because you have the characters, at least Sally's character, acknowledging Guns N' Roses, Black Sabbath, and all that. So yeah, you can tell that the person's a very metal individual who wrote this. But anyway, I think it might have been one of the fan fiction writers that comes and goes whenever the opportunity arises to post a story. And they extended this story. They actually went into several chapters with it. But the primary relationship is Sally and her mom. Basically, just like Helping Hand, Sally kind of helps her mom out, and basically one thing leads to another, and they end up finding out that, maybe that the one person they always wanted to be with and needed to be with for the rest of their life is each other. As insensual as that may sound, that's exactly the premise. But what's interesting, though, is the fact that they're not afraid to share the love with anybody else who's cool with it. For example, they share the love immediately with the likes of Nicole. That's right, Nicole gets involved. And sorry if my chin hit the mic there, I was looking at something. But yeah, Nicole gets involved because she's also another lover of Sally. So Sally has two lovers, Nicole being one of them, and her mom being the other. But then it's not just Sally and her mom and Nicole. It's also Rosie the nanny. That's right, Rosie the nanny gets involved, and it just goes from there. They involve Rosemary, they involve Elias, they involve Amadeus, both Rosemary and Amadeus being, the parents of Tails. They involve Tails, believe it or not. They just involve whoever they feel is going to be comfortable with the relationship, and then that's it. So, Sweet Royal Love's another example. A Mother in Need is another example, but this is an example of where somebody invites Alicia to be part of it. For example, in this story's universe, Tails is the one dating Sally, and basically Sally sees that her mother is in need of love. Basically, her mother needs to be loved, because her father, just like in other stories, is not giving it to her because he's a jerk. So they take the opportunity of the fact that, okay, wait a minute, Max is going to be gone on a world tour for a couple of days, or diplomatic world tour for a couple of days. I should let my mom take advantage of this and share my boyfriend with her. And that's what happens. And at first, Alicia in this story is a little, a little unsure about it, until Sally basically says it's cool, it's fine, Tails will be all right with it. And eventually Tails, he's of course a little reluctant at first too, but then he kind of is like, okay, I understand, I get it, I will do this, and that's it. And they do the deed. They get into the moment. It's a three-way between the two. You even have, during the moment, Sally and her mom kissing each other, which, Tails is surprised by and everything, because they're basically cleaning each other's faces off of certain covering, I'll put it that way. And as they're getting in the moment, they basically stop, I guess, as it's described, as they're getting in the moment, and they just go into a deep kiss with each other, basically showing that that even with Tails not around, they can have a lesbian relationship, if you will. So there's that example. Another example is, I think, and again, I do apologize for my chin hitting the mic. Another example, I think, is the Wives of Mobius story. I think it's the Wives of Mobius. And long story short, Alicia knows about the relationship between Tails and Sally, because they're again hooked up in this one. And so she basically gives Tails an ultimatum. Either give her the pleasure he's given Sally, or she'll let Max see the video of them, of Sally and Tails getting it on in the royal chambers. So yeah, that's another example where she gets called upon to get, some action. Another one, I'm trying to think. Another one is something about, it's another one by Blue Quill 68. It's about something like Passion on the Throne or something like that, where Sally, Alicia, and her mom, get it on with Sonic in this case. And again, just like with the Mother in Need story, you have both Sally and Alicia kissing each other and all that. There's that moment. But the bonus, from what I understand, the bonus of that story that wasn't in the other one is when Sonic's doing the deed with both of them, he takes it to a way another level, and let's just say the end result will be revealed 9 months later. Yeah, that's how far they went with that one. And then there's another one, I think, where they kind of do it at poolside or something like that. It's just an interesting scenario in all these stories that I've described, including some that are on the horizon. Yeah, Cyberfox is, and I'm sure others are basically in the works of, or in the progress, in the work, if you will, of bringing some other stories to life. For example, there's one called A Queen's Relief, where Max goes out of town and Alicia, needs some relief, And what happens is she calls upon Tails to fix a leaky faucet, but also takes advantage of the opportunity to get intimate. Then the other one is Who's Your Queen, where she finds out about Tails having a relationship with Sally, and I guess is okay with it, but wants to show Tails, hey, she may be the princess, but I'm your queen, if you catch my drift. So there's that example of upcoming stories. But like I said, there are webcomics too. Like I said, A Helping Hand is one of them. There is one where basically she gets it on with her son in an insensual way that ends up with her basically getting ready to, pop within 9 months. There's another where she basically acts like I'll just say it bluntly, a whore. And she decides, because the story takes place when Sonic and Sally obviously are not in good terms and everything. Alicia still wants to be friendly with Sonic and his family, but also sees, Max doesn't give me, pleasure or anything, and I want to want that pleasure. Sonic and Sally are kind of like on the rocks right now. And that's when she comes up with the devious idea of, I'm going to get this guy to, get with me, and that's that. Period. And that's what happens. So, yeah, there's a lot of good examples. Another one, like I mentioned earlier, I hinted at earlier, is called Miles and the Milks. And although it's only in 2 chapters right now, the next chapter would involve Alicia. Because in the first chapter, it's revealed that because Jules is still robotic but has free will, he can't give Bernadette the pleasure she needs. And she's going through a certain mood at the moment, the same kind of mood that Vanilla's going through. So both of them in both chapters end up getting in on the action with Tails, if you catch my drift. And the difference, though, is Bernadette and Jules are prepared for this because they've planted the seeds, if you will, to potentially have another child long ago. Well, Vanilla basically, tells Tails, hey, when you want to basically, not go all the way, but you're about to release, let me know. And when he tries to let her know during their moment, she doesn't get up. She doesn't, acknowledge what he's saying or what she told him to say, and he basically ends up doing the deed, and potentially, giving her, his offspring, if you get my drift. And this is all because he's encouraged by Jules to do it, because Jules is a robot and he can't, give that pleasure anymore. And because of Cream, because in this story, Cream's father has passed away, Vanilla's husband, and Vanilla hasn't had that pleasure in a while. And when the 3rd chapter comes around, it's hinted at that Max is going through a similar situation with Alicia. And just like Jules, because he's in a certain predicament, in other words, wheelchair-bound, disabled, if you will, he can't give Alicia what she wants. So Jules, who arrives at the castle to visit, to check up on the king, basically suggests, an idea for that solution, and obviously that idea, involves Tails. It involves Tails getting it on with the king's wife. So yeah, again, that potential 3rd part, whenever it happens, is another example. That story, Miles and the Mills, is another example, basically, of of Alicia being called upon. Yeah. I mean, again, everything I've used here as an example, or I've mentioned, from the PAL Comics Helping Hand Mobius Unleashed comic or web comic, to all the stories you can find at fanfiction.net and elsewhere. These are just prime examples of the fact that You know, if you were to do a ranking of the top 5, if not the top 4 MILFs in the Sonic franchise, Vanilla and Alicia would be at the top at 1 and 2, if not tied at the top at number 1, because they're the most utilized. And that's a fact. Everybody else would be behind them. You know, everybody else would be behind them, and you know, people, if they were to look at a list like that and wonder why, you know, Alicia is ranked at number 2 or tied at number 1, you know, with Vanilla, or let's say you're doing a tier list, right? You're doing a tier list, and they see in the S level, which is supposed to be super, the superior level, Alicia and Vanilla are at number 1, or basically in that category. People who don't know about, you know, some of the stories that I just mentioned would wonder why. Why is Alicia in that category? And then when somebody would explain to them, yeah, you could just imagine the reaction of like, oh, okay, we get it. But again, like I said, these are just prime examples. These are just prime examples of stories people have told me about, people have asked me to read and look at. You know, it's just a prime example of the fact that Vanilla in the overall Sonic franchise is not the only most requested MILF to be utilized in adult erotic NFSW Sonic stories. Because, believe it or not, Alicia Acorn, Queen Alicia Acorn, Sally's mom from the Archie books, is also one of the most requested. And that is a fact. That is a fact. And I know people might say, well, you're kind of wrong about it. Well, let me ask you this, guys, in response. Let me ask you this in response. If I'm wrong, look at the stories I came up with, or I just mentioned. Look at those stories. Tell me right to my face right now. Okay, don't tell me to my face right now, but figuratively, tell me to my face right now. You look at those stories that I just mentioned. You go to fanfiction.net, you go to PAL Comics, you look at all that, and you compare it to, you know, the stories Vanilla's in. And let me ask you, you know, you compare Alicia's appearances to Vanilla's appearances, and then the other appearances by the other characters, and let me ask you this. Who out of the 4 or 5 MILFs that you could find, that you can list, who out of them have the most appearances? Who are used the most? And I guarantee you, if your answer is Vanilla and Alicia, then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You will understand exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, as crazy as this audio video may sound to a lot of people, and as weird and as unusual, I should say, as it may sound, you know, it's the truth. It is a factual truth that basically, Alicia Acorn, outside of Vanilla, is the next most requested MILF to be used in adult Sonic media. Very adult NFSW Sonic media. And that is a fact. That is a fact. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. I know this may have sounded strange to a lot of you. Of course, I am doing this while I wait for my bus. It has cooled down just a bit today, not too much, but just a bit. I'm assuming, like I said, I'm waiting for my bus to arrive very soon, as I also check the temperature. But yeah, you know, it even surprises me now that I think about it, or when I thought about doing this video, it even surprised me. Because, again, all these stories, when you compare Bernadette and Rosemary from other stories that people had me read or shared with me, again, it's just mind-boggling that Alicia, who was introduced in the books, didn't really start having a role until post 100 issues, if you will, if not before that, is the second most requested, if not the next to most requested MILF, and for to be used in adult NFSW Sonic media. It's really surprising. It really is. But again, let me know what your guys' thoughts are. I know this may sound strange to a lot of people. This probably went on a lot longer than it should have. But I just had to get this off my chest, guys, because honestly, this is just, a moment that, well, not a moment, but, just, a situation. Just a situation that I think, would catch anybody off guard. It would catch anybody off guard. So yeah, I just wanted to come on here and, give you my thoughts on it. I want to know what your thoughts are and everything. Let me know down below. Comment if you like. Love to hear from each and every one of you on the situation. Super thanks will be enabled afterwards. And if you want to donate, if not already have donated in this premiere or future premieres, I've talked about this before here on this channel, but it's still kind of strange to really think about it. I mean, the fact that, you see a lot of these XXX, NFSW, fanfic, erotic stories, based on popular IPs that we grew up on as kids. And it really surprises you, what characters get focused on. In this case, Tails is focused on a lot in these stories because basically, I guess, folks view him as a ladies' man, if you know what I mean. And it doesn't matter, what characters, what female characters get with him. It's like he's always the main target. For example, I reviewed and talked about the fanfic, the adult XXX fanfic, Southern Fox 11. And that basically focused on Bunny and Tails, getting it on with each other because of the fact that Antoine did not want to basically get it on with Bunny himself because I guess of his, I guess you could say his stature, his manners, his personality or something like that. Even though they still loved each other, it's like he just could not bring himself to, basically give Bunny the satisfaction that she was hoping for. So what does she do? She goes straight to Tails, and Tails reluctant at first, even though he's aged up in the story to the appropriate age. Even though he's reluctant at first, he goes along with it. And it's not just Tails, it's not just Bunny either, I should say. It's also other female characters. For example, another story I talked about, my best friend's wife, focuses on Tails getting it on with Julie Sue. Because of the fact that Julie Sue has an urge that needs to be scratched, and basically Knuckles isn't delivering like he used to, so she decides, hey, Tails is going to stay with us for the week, help out, kind of be, a third member of the household. Why not take the opportunity throughout the week to have some fun? And again, even though Tails is a little reluctant, Julie Sue finds a way to ensure him, don't worry, nothing bad will come of this, when it's all said and done. In other words, telling him, don't worry, Knuckles will never find out. And, they proceed to, get it on. And we're left to, our imaginations to wonder what the rest of the week will be like for them, after this one, after the first intercourse between them. But it's not just them either. It's also some of the mothers of the characters. Like, for example, Bernadette Hedgehog from the Archie books. See, Bernadette in the Archie books is Sonic's mom. And she's one of the Robians, that gets restored back to flesh and blood, later on the comics run. Thanks to an alien race known as the Beam. But ever since she got restored, she's been looked at as one of the top Sonic, I guess you could say, MILF waifus, if you will, waifu MILFs or MILF waifus, whatever you want to call it, by fans. I mean, heck, I did a video where I asked the question of, and if I talked about, why Alicia Acorn, Sally's mom in the comics, had become such a waifu since she made her debut in the comic. And I gave off various reasons why she basically became second to none, underneath Vanilla, if you will. But Bernadette is not that far off either. Bernadette Hedgehog is not that far off either, especially when it comes to her being the one that gets chosen a lot, and I mean a lot, by fans to get it on with Tails. Now, I'm not going to deny and say that maybe I didn't suggest the story request-wise and everything a year ago or so, between, that basically focuses on her and Tails. I'm not going to say I didn't, because I did. I'm not going to say what it is. You just have to see for yourself. And my recommendation is go to archiveofourown.org, or fanfiction.net, and go to the writer Made in Nowhere. That's one word, Made in Nowhere, and you'll find it. You will find it. It's probably one of the only ones there. And if you use archiveofourown.org, if you use that, you could go to Made in Nowhere's page, and he will have basically a chapter, a chapter's worth of what he calls smut one-shots. That's right. The folder is, the chapter thing, the folder is known as smut one-shots. Go to that and just look down and you'll see exactly which one it is. And that's all I'm going to say. But on top of that, there are other stories involving her as well. For example, I think I've mentioned this before, Miles and the MILFs. As I've talked about, I think, in a previous audio video, in this story, Tails basically is getting it on with all the older women, mothers, if you will, the MILFs, around New Mobotropolis. That is what he's doing. That is what he is doing. He's getting it on with them, starting, of course, with Bernadette Hedgehog, doing it twice with her, and seemingly, I think, on the verge of doing it a third time in the story once the story continues, doing it with Vanilla the rabbit, and then recently, in the more recent chapter, Alicia Acorn, Sally's mom. Now, what's interesting about this is all three scenarios have a different reasoning, or have a different kind of plot to them, or twist. For example, Bernadette is already infused with a seed from her husband that was frozen in chronogenic state, or whatever, however you pronounce it, cryonic state, we'll put it that way, cryonic state, has been frozen in cryonic state for years. So all Tails has to do basically is just, scratch her itch, if not provide, I guess you could say, the jumpstart that the seed needs to, really take off and be fertilized. He just needs to, provide the jumpstart. And it's not just once. He does this a couple of times, if you will. And again, like I said, the third time looks like it's on the verge. Vanilla, on the other hand, this is because Kareem overhears what's going on, finds out what's going on, relays it to her mom, and let's just say the rest is history. But the end result is that apparently Vanilla ends up basically being fertilized by Tails, but ensures Tails, hey, you don't have to worry about anything because no one will know. And even though that calms Tails' nerves, it's still it's still kind of nerve-wracking to him, or still a little making him unsure about what he did, about what potentially could come of this, and people eventually finding out. And then, of course, like I said, the recent one is actually where he takes command. He takes charge because Alicia Acorn she's going through a similar thing, but she is more kind of reluctant at first until Tails helps her get into it. If you will, he finally helps her get into it, and then the rest is history. And now it looks like in the next chapter, we're going to be having Tails have some intimacy with Mina Mongoose. Mina Mongoose's mom, Isabel Mongoose. And from the hints of it, it looks like it's also going to involve Lala Lee, Knuckles' mom, is going to get involved. And I think even Queen Alina's getting involved. I'm not really sure how that's going to work. But I can guarantee it has to coincide with Tails getting it on with his mom. That's got to be the last stop that they do to close out the story. But getting back to Bernadette, though, this story and the one that I kind of requested are not the only ones. There's one called My Son's Keeper, where basically, in this alternate universe, both Jules Hedgehog and Amadeus, Prower, Rosemary's husband, and Jules Hedgehog, Bernadette's husband, have passed away. And it's up to Tails, basically, to fulfill those needs. And it looks like it's just going to be Bernadette until pretty much Bernadette, knowing Rosemary for as long as she has, knows that Rosemary would like to have a piece of this as well. And let's just say the rest is history. And both not only end up having simultaneously the time of their life, if you will, with Tails, and even making out with each other in the process of having the time of their lives. But basically, they are now in a three-way relationship, 2 wives, 1 husband-like relationship, where the end result is, well, let's just say Tails is going to be a proud papa of 2 step-siblings in a very unique way. But then we get to the one that just came out today, called My Best Friend's Mother. And it has a similar premise. If you will, to the one I just mentioned. But here, not only has Jules passed away, but he is no longer around, not just to love his wife and be there for her, but he's mostly not around to scratch her sexual itch. And one day, Tails decides, because he was asked to do so, to come over and debug Bernadette's, I guess you could say, debug Bernadette's computer of viruses and, giving it overall protection from any future viruses. However, the twist, ladies and gentlemen, is all this takes place, after Jules passes and everything, Tails going over to Bernadette's house to debug her computer and give it overall protection and everything for future viruses. This all takes place during what is known as the heat season. That's right. Basically, every character, male and female, is in heat in the story. They are in heat in the story. And what happens is that obviously it's hinted at that Sonic does find his mom attractive, but he's in a relationship with Sally, and Sally right now is going through her own heating experience, is going through her own heat where she needs Sonic to satisfy her. So Sonic has to go over there and satisfy her all the time and try to fight the urges of not doing it with his mom, because he's also going through the heat, and he has to keep it inside of him, if you know what I mean, until he gets to Sally. So what does this leave Bernadette to do? Well, again, like I said, Jules is no longer around, and she needs someone to scratch her sexual itch. And she tries her best, in her own unique way, with the toys and stuff that she has. She tries in her own unique way with the toys and stuff that she has. And it isn't until, like I mentioned, Tails comes over to fix her computer, debug it, and, from viruses, and, give it an overall protection from future viruses, that basically things take a turn for the intimate. Because while Tails is doing this, Bernadette goes into her room and tries to basically relieve herself because she's also in heat. And what's interesting for Tails is this is his first experience in heat season. Yeah. So you can only guess what happens. And if you guess exactly what happens, you're right. Because what occurs is that she is trying to relieve herself so much, or Tails is, debugging her computer and installing the antivirus program and all that it's doing this, that he hears something. He hears something, coming from upstairs. So he goes upstairs asking if everything's okay, if she needs anything. And she's like, oh, no, everything's fine. And Tails is like, okay, I'll leave you alone. Let me know if you need anything, or I'll let you know when I'm done with the computer. And he goes back downstairs. And the reason, though, Bernadette is making these noises, trying to relieve herself, you know what I mean, is she's basically fantasizing about Tails. She's fantasizing about him. Now, we can only assume Tails is of age here. We can assume that. He's of age. And because, let's be honest, you can't be in your first heat, if you will, if you're not at age, I guess, when it comes to the Sonic universe, or the multiverse of Sonic universes, if you know what I mean. So, we can assume he's of age. So anyway, that's what's going on. Bernadette is fantasizing about him. So after she kind of temporarily, relieves herself, she changes and goes downstairs to check on Tails. But as she's approaching downstairs, she hears a noise, like moaning, if you will. And when she gets to a certain point where Tails doesn't see her, but she sees him trying to, quote unquote, relieve himself. And he's doing it by fantasizing about her and her being in tight yoga pants, because the excuse she gave him was she was doing yoga. So seeing this and realizing that they both want to be with each other, or both want to basically fulfill each other's fantasies, she decides to go back upstairs, put on some tight clothing, if you will, with a few exceptions not being, on her, go downstairs, approach Tails, and the moment Tails sees her, he thinks he's getting caught and everything, she's going to scold him, until he sees what she's wearing, and then, pretty much you go from there. And, of course, Tails is unsure about what's about to happen, because he doesn't want Sonic, his best friend, his bro, if you will, to find out. But she assures him, don't worry, he won't find out. And let's just say the dominoes start to fall right then and there. The dominoes start to fall, one by one, until basically we get to the moment of moments, if you know what I mean. Because Tails, of course, just being his first season of heat, allows himself to succumb to these desires, to the heat, to the heat's manipulation and these desires that he is now developing. And let's just say things get really wild and frisky and intimate and erotic with these two. There is no doubt. Because what happens is that during their moment, if you know what I mean, an animalistic side, the more dominant, I guess you could say predatorial side, the more claiming, predatorial, marking side, animalistic side, if you will, of Tails, starts to, overtake his mind, his reasonable senses, and let's just say he just, during the moment, takes control and really goes to town, and Bernadette is more than happy to, join in with him when it happens. I mean, there are moments where he, does a few slappings of the, a lot of slapping of the rear, and she's saying things like, slap me more and make me into such and such for you and everything. And it's like, holy smokes. It's like, holy smokes. It's like, what? It's like, what are these writers turning not only Tails into, but Bernadette into as well? Because what happens then is that it's because they're getting so into it. They're getting so into this moment that neither are realizing what the consequences could be. Well, at least Bernadette probably knows. But Tails, because that animalistic side of him to mate, mark, claim, dominant, be predatorial, if you will, is overriding his senses, he pretty much, doesn't realize that what he's about to do is going to have some future consequences within the next 9 to 10 months in the continuity. Because what happens, is basically at the end, is he unloads within Bernadette, and unloads in a way that basically can ensure, possibly, that within the next 9 to 10 months, she's not only going to be a mother again, but he's going to be a father, and Sonic's going to have a step-sibling. Yeah. And what's funny about this is that after the sessions, Tails' mind finally clears up, and it dawns on him what he just did, but then Bernadette kisses him and reassures him that she wanted it to happen. And Tails has to remind her, but I thought you told me you didn't want Sonic, that Sonic wouldn't find out. I thought you told me he wouldn't find out. And Bernadette just laughs that off and says, don't worry, I'll handle him. And then she explains why she wanted this to happen. Why she wanted Tails to do what he did. Why she basically wanted him to claim her, mark her as his own. And it's basically because she wants them to be lovers, so that they can enjoy each other on a nightly basis, if you know what I mean. And she asked him if he wants that to happen, if he wants to be her lover or not. And he thinks about it. And it's like, you know what? Because basically he comes up with he's thinking about it, and he's like, you know what? Yeah, I'd like to do that. And he doesn't answer her with words. He just smiles sweetly at her and nods. And then all of a sudden she's like, okay, that's all I want to know. She basically reverses positions on him, if you will, to where she's on top. And she's like, time for round 2. And Tails is like, round 2? And she's like, yeah, it's heating season. And it's going to take more than just one round to end this. And she tells him they're going to keep going into the night, right, to the point that he makes her into I'm not going to say the word, for his, white essence. We'll put it that way. For his white essence. And then basically that's how the story kind of ends. Well, it kind of ends because Sonic then wants to know, okay, Sonic's kind of worried. He hasn't heard from his mom. He hasn't heard from Tails for about a week or two. So he wants to know what's going on. And when he finally does talk to his mom, she just happens to be in the middle of something that he's not aware of. Because you see, he's looking for Tails, but he doesn't aware that when his mom answers the door and everything to talk to him, he's not aware that Tails is kind of, there with her, doing a little bit of satisfying for Bernadette, but I'm not going to say any more than that. And once she assures him, okay, don't worry, he's fine, he's probably taking care of himself, he knows what to do, which kind of calms Sonic's nerves, Sonic then tells her, okay, fine, no problem, thanks for letting me know, I got to get back to the castle because Sal's about to wake up, and, because, like I said, in this story, it's heating season, so he has to go back before she wakes up and still satisfy her. So after Sonic leaves and everything, you see Tails basically come up from where he was, and Bernadette being playful with him, saying you almost got us caught, and then Tails has to playfully counter her by saying, you're one to talk, and everything, and she's like, yeah, that's true. And let's just say things proceed from there, and they just get so wild and extremely intimate and NFSW erotic in all parts of the house and all furniture of the house that, you just leave it up to your imagination of what takes place afterwards, because that's how the story ends. But yeah, it seems that if we were to rank the top 3, waifu MILFs in Sonic that get portrayed in a very erotic manner, if you know what I mean, the top 3, Vanilla, Alicia, Bernadette. That's pretty much it. And I don't think anybody could deny that. But yeah, this is a story. This new one that just came out, along with the other ones I mentioned, really puts Sonic's mom from the Archie books in a light to where you're like, damn. It's like, what is it going to take for this girl to be satisfied? And again, when it comes to these kind of stories, you kind of like, you wonder to yourself, well, how can this be justified? And again, these authors, they give reasonings. They give actual legit reasonings of how they can be justified. But anyway, it definitely shows that Bernadette is, up there as the third most, requested, third most utilized Sonic waifu, a MILF waifu, if you will, in the franchise, period. End of story. So let me know what your thoughts are, though, guys. Have you read any of these kind of stories? Which one of them do you think emphasizes Bernadette the most at this level? And let me know how you feel about characters being portrayed like this. That even though it's, just fantasy, fanfic, fans just doing their own thing. Let me know down below in the comments, as well as the live chat during the premiere. Like the video. And until next time, guys, I am out. So, first of all, this is a bit of a surprise. I'm doing this on location from the Best Western Plus in Roseville, California. But I wanted to, and the reason I'm here is because, as I've mentioned before, it's my nephew's wedding. So by the time you watch this, the wedding will have already been done, and I will be home and everything. Or at least on the reception, depending on when I decide to put this up. But anyway, I wanted to come on here because recently I've been talking about, well, I wouldn't say recently, but occasionally I've been talking about, basically why certain mothers of Archie Sonic are looked at as some of the most requested, as we put it, MILFs, if you will, in the fandom. And that's no lie. Obviously we know about Vanilla in the overall franchise being the most popular MILF, not just in Archie Sonic, but also IDW Sonic, as well as in, other Sonic media like Sonic X, Sonic, any kind of Sonic that she's a part of, she is looked at as a very, very popular, very requested MILF, if you will. But, with that said, the other two I talked about were, of course, Bernadette Hedgehog, who is Sonic's mom in the Archie Sonic books, and Alicia Acorn, who is Sally's mom in the Sally Acorn's mom, Princess Sally Acorn. That is her mom, Alicia Acorn, Queen Alicia, in the Archie Sonic books as well. But did you know there's another? And this one is kind of unique in their history. Because depending on how you view her in the books, in the Archie books, especially later on when the Council of Acorn was created and all that, there is no doubt that a lot of fans have viewed her as pretty much a MILF that folks would love to, really get their hands on and really play around with creatively. Not just writing-wise, but artistically. And that, of course, is the mother of Miles Tails Prower himself, Rosemary Prower. And she has a very unique history, I'll put it that way. And what I mean by unique, like I said, is she, like, her husband, And just like Tails' big bro parents, Bernadette and Jules, back in the early days, according to the Archie Sonic book, she was roboticized. She was roboticized and pretty much made into a robotic slave until she and Amadeus, the father of Tails and her husband, were rescued by an alien race called the Beam. That's B-E-M. And what they did upon rescuing them is test out a little experiment that they had, and that experiment was de-robotization. But because they had basically teleported them to the planet, and, well, long story short, had no way of getting them back home, basically, Amadeus and Rosemary stayed there until they had an encounter with Sonic post 145, in the arc Sonic in Space, before he came back home. Not only was Sonic able to figure out, oh my gosh, this is where they're at, and they're still alive, but he was able to give them, the opportunity to send a message to Tails to let him know, hey, we're still here, we still love you, and we're still hoping to be with you one day. Well, that day came a lot sooner than they thought, because thanks to Tails' uncle, Merlin Prower, who's a wizard, the Master Emerald, at least one of the Chaos Emeralds, contributed by Knuckles, and basically empowering, I think contributed by Sonic, they were able to activate some kind of a spell that allowed, teleportation spell I should say, that allowed them to travel to the world of the Beam, or the BEM, depending on how you pronounce it, while it's in the middle of a war, but at the same time were able to basically discover Tails' parents was there in the middle of it trying to survive. And basically, by the grace of God, or Aurora, which is their god in that world, they were able to, rescue them and bring them back. Now, with that said, as I mentioned, she has had an interesting history. Because, of course, being very supportive of Amadeus, she wanted to basically see something be done about the royal family. And what she wanted to see be done was the royal family kind of, not necessarily give up their power, but kind of be more governmental. In other words, be a monarchy that listened to the people and also took the advice of the people, which is represented by a council. And she learned all this, her Amadeus, learned all this, when they were on the BEMS or Beams planet. So, long story short, they were able to work out some kind of an agreement where this happened, and she became one of the initial inaugural members. Now, did she still have a bit of a, I guess you could say, agenda with the royal family? In a sense, yes, but not really. You see, more along the lines, I believe, in my belief, is Rosemary was putting up a front because she did not want to make it seem, too obvious that she kind of understood why the royal family still kind of, I guess you could say, took charge and did what they had to do. Now, as far as her being a MILF, well, let's put it this way. It wouldn't be until long after the book was done. Now, it could have happened during the book as well. That's not, there's no evidence, I should say, that doesn't point to that. But it seems more than ever since the book was done, unfortunately, because of behind-the-scenes reasoning, Rosemary became one of the more sought-after MILFs in the Sonic fandom creativity-wise. Whether it was fan fiction, webcomics, you name it. And it didn't matter who they placed her with. There are stories where she's actually, in fact there's one story I should say, there's one story as a matter of fact, where she, is actually, how do I put this? She's actually having a very passionate, intimate encounter with Queen Alicia Acorn herself. And there are also other examples, artistically and storytelling-wise, where she is actually, getting intimate with Sonic's mom from the Archie book, Bernadette, as well as with Vanilla and so on. But what's interesting though is the guys she ends up with. Now you would think, well, Sonic's an obvious choice, which is true. Stories and artistically, animation, you name it. That is evident. There is no doubt. But outside of Sonic, outside of maybe Alicia Acorn, Sally's brother in the Archie book, outside of her own husband, there is one person that she loves being a MILF for. One character. And it's a very instinctual, reasoning. And that character, of course, is Taylor. She basically, depending on the stories that she's put in, comic-wise, animation-wise, fanfic-wise, she is put into such crazy, unique scenarios that it is not funny. It is not. It is not funny whatsoever. As a matter of fact, there's a story that was done by Zero the Fox over at fanfiction.net. It's a story that obviously he did not bring over to archiveofourOwn.org. But in this story, called The Adventures of Miles and the Wife of Mobius, Miles is basically sleeping, if you will, having intimacy, if you will, NFSW erotic-wise, with all of the wives, or would-be wives, of some of the main male characters. And that even includes characters like Sally and Buddy and so on. But during the story though, throughout it I should say, Rosemary starts to get this temptation. Like she's curious as to why Tails is going off and doing all these things. She kind of has an idea, but not really. She has an idea, but not really. But it's during this story that her little subplot stuff is coming into play, because she starts yearning, just like all the other women that, wives, if you will, that Tails has been with. In the story, she starts yearning for her own son. Because in the story, Amadeus, she's still married to him, is more focused on his job as a general, if you will, a leader of the army. That he basically, neglects, the wants of his wife. So, long story short, the lustful side of her mind kicks in and says, Tails, basically the lustful side of her mind kicks in and says to her, and basically convinces her to say, Tails is going to be yours. You're going to bed Tails. You're going to mate with Tails. And that's exactly what happens. Even though there's that small portion of her mind that's saying, don't do this, it's not right, she still goes on and does it. And that's not the only time. There's another story. I don't know if it's part of a chapter series as well. I think it was. It was a scene in another series, if you will. Another story series, if you will. And, in the story series, Tails is dating Sally. But basically in the series, Amadeus is away on a mission. He's away with the army, the Royal Guard. And he basically put Tails in charge of the house, basically made him the man of the house. And what happened is that Rosemary, feeling distraught, saddened that Amadeus is not there to be with her, this gets noticed by Tails, and he comforts her. He comforts her, but during that comfort, she starts doing something that even surprises him. She starts kissing him on the cheek, and then as she's kissing him on the cheek, she starts kind of going around his face, basically tenderly kissing his cheek and everything until she reaches his lips. And that's when it kind of shocks Tail until Rosemary kind of explains that, you know, she has this itch. She needs it scratched, if you will. And everything that Amadeus, his dad, told him, you know, starts coming floating back. Like, you need to take care of your mother while I'm gone. You're the man of the house. And basically to Tail, he starts kind of basically believing and convincing himself that even means doing the nasty with his mom. And that's what happens. Now, fortunately, though, the difference between this encounter and the encounter that he has with his mom, where she's the one that wants to get at him, she's the one that wants to mate with him. The difference here is that when they get close to their moment, if you know what I mean, they get close to the moment, Rosemary, you know, pulls off. She pulls off and she lets the release of Tails, if you will, the release that Tails has, let's say, you know, erupt behind her and on her backside. Well, unlike in the other one, where she is basically, you know, wanting him for her own, she does not get up. She basically lets him explode within her, if you know what I mean. Basically causing a potential of pregnancy. But yeah, Rosemary, I'll put it this way, when it comes to being one of the third most requested and the third most popular milk in the overall Sonic franchise, fourth, I should say, fourth most popular milk in the Sonic franchise, along with Vanilla, along with Bernadette, along with Alicia. When it comes to her, yeah, you can put her with anybody you want, you know, male or female. But it seems the most popular pairing, is her and Tate. And that is a lot. There are stories even where she gets convinced by, you know, her friends like Bernadette Hedgehog that it's all right to want to be with your son because, hey, that's sometimes how nature works. But overall, outside of that, you know, all you have to do is look online at places like inkbunny.net, furfitting, fanfiction.net, you name it, Deviant, you know, Palcom, you know, you name it, and you will find, stories and, you know, animation and artistic work, webcomics that showcase everything I talked about when it comes to Rosemary. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think everything I've mentioned does kind of factor into how Rosemary is portrayed? What are your thoughts? Love to hear from each and every one of you on this. Live chat during the premiere, but SuperChats are open. If you want to help donate that way, it'd be greatly appreciated. Also, check out my Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. And also, you will get an audio version of this down the line on my VW Roses Discussions podcast. But guys, give me a thought. You know, do you agree with what I said? Have any of you read or seen, you know, these stories, or read and seen these webcomics, animations, artwork that I've mentioned that displays Rosemary Prower, Tales of Zombie and Archie books in this manner? Let me know, guys, down below in the comments section. Love to hear from you guys. And until then, I am signing off from the Best Western Plus in Roseville, California. Let me know what your thoughts are, guys. And